I'm Zal.
And today we are here to have a conversation with you about global leadership.
And particularly global leadership in the respect of being a third culture kid and how that affects us. So first we'll just introduce a little bit about ourselves and how we ended up in this third culture kidness.
I am half Filipina, half German. I was born in Hong Kong, and until I was about 25, I had never lived in either Germany or the Philippines. My dad was a hotelier, and we moved every 3-4 years to another city in Southeast Asia. So Southeast Asia is really what I consider my home. I came back to Singapore to work about 4 years ago after going through middle school and high school here, and this is now where I consider my base.
I'm Indian, but didn't live in India until I was much later in life. Born in the Philippines, lived in Indonesia, grew up in Singapore, lived in Canada, Australia, and then in India for a while. The reason why we've come together is because both Tanya and I have we do very different jobs, but we both have understanding and experience working in different countries. I worked in India and Australia, Tanya's worked in Germany and the Philippines. And we are here to talk about how being a third culture kid helps in terms of management.
So a little bit about what I do, and then a little bit about what Zal does. I work for an international luxury retail company. I sit in the marketing team for APAC, for the region, but I focus on events for 9 countries.
And I have my own startup, and I have had one previously in India where I was running a team over there, and my background is primarily marketing and sales. So we're going to talk about a few things that we feel, facets that we feel help or affect third culture kids in terms of how they are in the global workforce. And the first one that we're going to introduce is adaptability. And when we had a conversation about this topic, it was the first thing that we both sort of came up with, which was the ability for you to change yourself based on the surroundings you're faced with, which kind of, as a third culture kid, as someone who has moved around a lot or traveled a lot extensively, something you've probably been doing your whole life, whether you knew it or not.
Yeah. I mean, you have to adapt to a lot of things. I mean, on a personal level, you have to adapt to culture, I guess, when you move from a city or a country or a culture that you know so well, and then you get plonked into a culture in Southeast Asia, like, let's say, Taiwan or China, for example, and you're having to learn and grow and do business in a place that's kind of alien to you. So adaptability is very, very big. Not only on a cultural level, but also on a business level, because the way people do business in China versus London versus Thailand, even versus Korea, they're all very, very different. And one of the characteristics that you have to sort of nurture, I guess, is to be able to adapt to all of those given situations.
And one of the things that I've seen, or that I've considered quite valuable, is you are able to notice differences in cultures, from simple things like how people give business cards. If you weren't aware of how various people in different countries did that, in Asia there's quite a ritual process as to handing over a business card. It's got to be done with 2 hands. Whereas if you go to Australia, they throw them out like confetti. So it's just a very different thing, but it means something in particular cultures as opposed to meaning something else. And so just from that very basic level of engaging, interacting with more people from different cultures, you understand what is important to them.
Yeah, and then I guess in line with that, to be adaptable, you have to be flexible. You have to be flexible enough not to stick to your ideals, your systems, your processes, in order to be able to adapt to the systems and processes in that local market. For example, I work in events, and a lot of the time when I'm working on an event in Korea, let's say, there's a language barrier there because I don't speak Korean, but also there's there's a cultural barrier and a systems and processes barrier that is so ingrained in how they operate day to day. And when I work there, I'm not working with people who have had the same background, who have had the same experiences. I'm working with people who build, and with people who are very artistic, and with people who are very, they're very good with their hands. They're construction workers. They do incredible things. But we come from very, very different backgrounds, and a lot of the time, that's the first hurdle that you have to overcome. I can't go in there and start to talk about business objectives and things like that. Like, I have to find a different way of communicating the story that we want to tell so that they can bring it to life, because without them, it doesn't come to life. And that's something that I have to be flexible with, because they have systems and processes in Korea, from confirming venues and doing certain things, and engineering works and stuff like that I have to adhere to, that I might not have to adhere to anywhere else. But what I'm trying to say is, you have to be flexible enough to get the same outcome in taking a different journey there.
And so, leading on to that, so we came up with three, and the one that we think sums up both of these and allows you to have that sort of space is humility. So the ability to recognize in others that you don't know necessarily everything, and to kind of go with the flow. And we've been experienced. For me, it was the country, ironically, that I probably had the biggest cultural shock in living in was India, and I'm Indian, right? But as a country, it's so different from any place I've ever lived, and trying to understand how to manage the bureaucracy and the even a very different way of dealing with people. It really kind of, it shows you that even though I'm Indian, what I really know, I know very little, right? And so you're just always open to learning, and you're always open to understanding what's going on, I think. It was a very, for me, it was quite a humbling experience to go to a country where I tell people I'm Indian, and then realize that I know nothing about this place.
Yeah. I think another really, really important thing is, we talk about being global, and we talk about having a global mindset. And that's very important. But I think what's even more important, and we've discussed about this a lot, is you have to be able to almost think globally, but then act locally. Like, you have to be able to be the way we try to be on a day-to-day basis when we conduct business with people that, from different cultures. And you have to be able to empathize with them. You have to be able to understand why they do things the way they do things. And you have to be able to take a global initiative or a global goal and execute on a local level. I think that's really, really important for a global leader to be able to do. And it's not the easiest thing. You have to be able to do all of these things and adapt and gain the trust of your peers and all of these things, and to be able to do that.
So the next question that we've got is, how can organizations better integrate and cultivate global citizens? From a point of view of a company, I guess it's difficult to have a culture driven around that, because so much of our background is what has led us to here. So it's almost like happenstance, and just by fate, by living in these different countries, and not by anything that we did as a process. But one of the interesting options that Tanya suggested, because she's been in particularly difficult situations, having to manage in particularly difficult countries, were cultural immersion programs.
Yeah, very important. Zal touched on the fact that we're quite blessed in the way that when we grew up, this was our life. We moved around a lot. We always came from a point of minority, so you always tried to find a way to fit in, and because of that, you were keen to learn about the culture. You were keen to learn the language and all these things. But not everyone gets to have that experience growing up. So I work in a company where a lot of different people from all around the world live in countries that they're not born in. And I'll give you an example. Working in China, for me, is quite easy because growing up, I lived there for a little bit and I know the language, I speak the language, I can immediately connect with people there because, you know, they welcome me with open arms because I don't look Chinese, but I speak Chinese and it's a wonderful thing. Having said that, when you have someone come in who doesn't know anything about the culture, doesn't speak the language, is from somewhere entirely different, cultural immersion programs become so inherent and important in their ability to be accepted. I think it's really important before they leave, actually, you know, when they know that they've accepted the job, maybe for 2 months or however long they have to be able to start to learn the language, even if it's like little things, you know, like how to say hello or introduce themselves and things like that, just to break the ice when they get there, but also give you little tidbits on do's and don'ts, you know, about the culture, like how in Thailand you never show the soles of your feet to the person that's sitting in front of you,
or anybody.
for example. Exactly, like little things like that that will really help them. That will make sure that they don't, you know.
Well, for lack of a better word, just make sure you don't offend a whole room of people.
Exactly.
Like, you know, for example, for the Chinese, anything to do with the number 4 is bad luck.
Yeah.
You know, you never give anybody a clock for a gift because it's considered to be counting down to death. Like these are just things that if you didn't know, you would never ever think about. But obviously, when you deal with a different culture, understanding what is important to them and what are cultural norms and sensitivity is quite important.
Yeah, it makes the transition so much easier. And then in line with that, when we talk about how organizations can better integrate and cultivate global citizens and global mindsets, it really starts from the top. And this is where it's interesting. Zal is an owner of his own business, and as that business grows, I'm assuming, knowing you will cultivate that global mindset within the people that work for you. Yes.
Yes and no. I mean, it's a difficult thing to embed a mindset. I have a team that sits in India and a team that sits in Singapore, and the team that sits in Singapore is very international, and the team that sits in India is not. And so the way that you do help them understand is, so we have a 24-hour, 7 days a week video connection between all of our offices. So you're able to, it's not chatting or emailing, you actually get up and you can speak to a person that's there. So, I mean, it helps, and you know, you're making that connection, you're making that bond, but also by bringing them here and bringing our guys over there, you help them create those bonds, right? And that's a process that has to begin and has to be considered something that the company does, like we actively pursue that.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, on my side, I work for a company that has been around for years. I mean, we go way back. And it really has to start from the top. If the person that is running the company does not nurture this idea of being a global citizen, doesn't display those ideas, then it becomes a lot harder for people when you trickle down to be able to be that way too. So it's really a top-down, lead by example approach, I feel.
And then the final point that we're looking at is how third culture kids can be a driving force in the future of global leadership. To me, it's becoming quite obvious, because as you look at the world now, more countries trade with each other than ever before. You know, getting something like this cup here, it could have easily passed, you know, been created in one country, shipped to somewhere else. The marketing was out of one country, the company that owns it lives somewhere else. So the engagement across the planet in terms of resources, in terms of products, are far more than ever before. And as a result, people that are in a position to understand how to do business or lead people, and understand that, you know, if you are talking to a Singaporean, it's very different to how you talk to an Indian, to how you talk to an American, and what your expectations should be of those conversations. And I think it becomes very clear that people who have that skill set will be the ones that are moving forward and moving groups of people, because they're the ones that can understand and engage.
Yeah, it's only in the last maybe 4 years that I realize how awesome my upbringing has been in preparing me for the role that I have today.
Yeah.
I never ever so basically I grew up in different cities, different cultures, different countries my entire life. Every 3-4 years we moved. Then I went to university in London, and I stayed in London for 9 years, and I worked in London. And then I moved to the Philippines, and I worked there. Never in any interview, when they asked me what my add value could be, did I ever touch on the fact that I was a global citizen or that I was adaptable to different cultures, that I could communicate with lots of different people in many different ways. That never ever came to my mind. It was always like, oh, I'm professional, I'm very driven, I'm
hardworking,
I'm a hard worker, I'm organized, all of these things. So I would say now, having worked in a regional role, I realized the importance that my background actually had in preparing me to be able to do my job properly, because it comes naturally to us. And I think that is something that third culture kids should really embrace. And I think once you embrace that, and in those positions internationally across the world, you can be the driving force by leading by example. Showing people how to nurture and accept and understand, empathize with, and do business in other cultures, because that's kind of what you've been doing your entire life. Maybe not business, but making friends at school, etc. Things like that. So I encourage you to mention that in interviews, because as the world becomes so international, businesses become so globalized, it's very, very important to be able to have people in your team that are of that same mindset and that live and breathe that life.
Okay, I think we are
And I think
done.
we're done.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.